Hey guys, Tarke here. This is just going to be me talking about boss design in Path of Exile over some random footage of me killing bosses and doing Maven content this league. So I killed Maven for the first time yesterday, and I was sadly quite underwhelmed about the fight. Rather than just grumble and make a video all about why I wasn't that engaged by Maven, I thought it'd be more interesting to do a video talk about what I think makes for an interesting boss fight in Path of Exile, things I'd like to see, and things I'm surprised we don't see more of. First off, I just want to talk about what I think seems to be the standard formula for making a boss in Path of Exile, since I think most bosses follow this rule. I'm sure there are some exceptions. But off the top of my head, Shaper, Elder, Itziri, Cirrus, Maven all follow the same kind of formula of we are going to have a set of abilities that change ever so slightly throughout the fight, and we'll have downtime phases, which will either be, we will now spawn a bunch of ads in this, or you've survived this phase, here's an opportunity to refill your flasks. Now, it's worth noting that every single boss fight in Path of Exile has to be balanced around flasks, it has to be balanced around having an instant logout, and the fact that most fights let you use 6 portals. Another thing which is worth considering is unlike something like Dark Souls, where if you fail to a boss, you just reload and just run back in, or you reload a save. In Path of Exile, most boss fights are gated behind currency, so there's a case of you need to have the 4 keys, or whatever the thing is to spawn the fight, or hours of gameplay of doing stuff on the Atlas and actively playing. And that, I think, is one of the main... It's one of the main struggle points with bossing. So, in a game like Dark Souls, I think there's nothing wrong with having a fight which, if you make the tiniest mistake, you instantly die. Oh well, go again. Because in Dark Souls, you just go again. The whole point of the game is you just constantly just butting your head against this thing until you eventually get it down, and then you feel this really big, like, yes, I am so awesome, I finally overcame this challenge. Or in something like Path of Exile, where if you're not very good at the game, or you're inexperienced, you go into a fight completely blind, like, if you failed your first ever Cirrus, it could be hours upon hours until you get to your second one. Like, for a lot of people, that could be the only attempt they get that day. Can you imagine how tedious it'd be trying to play Dark Souls if you only had one attempt a day on each boss fight? And I think with that in mind, it's not that fair to design things with just, oh, you mess up this one mechanic, you are dead. And that's how we get into talk about Maven. So Maven, for me, was a pretty easy fight, and we've got that coming up next. So I went in semi-blind. I'd watched a world-first kill of it, and I'd watched random rip clips of it on Reddit. So I vaguely knew the mechanics of the fight. I'm someone who's raided quite a lot of World of Warcraft, so I'm quite used to like watching a kill once and being like, okay, these are the main mechanics I need to look out for. I'm like an okay-ish player, and I'm playing a build which is pretty good at the fight at course to carry. Spoilers, I die once in this fight. I die to the memory game. I think it was the 3rd memory game. And basically, it wasn't a case of I died because I misremembered the memory game and I made a mistake. I died because I couldn't actually see what the pattern was. Like, I didn't see what happened. And then I'm like, I guess I'll just guess at it and log out. And then I logged out too slow. That was not a good moment. So then what I did for the rest of the fight is whenever there was a memory game, I'm like, I have enough portals. I just logged out, came back in, and then just face rolled the fight. Because nothing else in the fight hits particularly hard. I think at one point my health goes down to like 4k. And that was pretty much it. It was a complete face roll. And I died once to like a gotcha moment that I only died to because of poor telegraphing. And this is a big thing that Path of Exile struggles with. Visual clarity and telegraphing. If you're going to design boss fights, which are very clearly like MMO inspired, you need to keep in mind that in a game like World of Warcraft, you have all these add-ons that are just screaming and barking orders at you. And you have raid leaders whose job it is to raid the lead. Raid the lead to lead the raid. You can have incredibly intricate fights that are designed in that way, but then the game needs to facilitate that level of gameplay. And Path of Exile, I don't necessarily think does. when you've got such big issues with visual clarity. So there's the case of the actual boss fight itself having unclear visuals. There's the case of graphical issues, of which there are many, sadly, but that's something which, you know, will hopefully be fixed. But there's also the fact that just a lot of builds have screen clutter. And this is one of the biggest issues I always have with Path of Exile. It's one of the issues why I play so much Caustic Arrow, is it's not very visually intense. So it's very easy to fight with, like, you can do boss fights with Caustic Arrow because you can see what the enemy is doing. But, you know, if you're playing something like Cremation, if you're playing something like Bladeful Blade Blast, if you're just playing anything which just spams the screen with stuff, yeah, good luck, mate, because you just can't see what's going on. And it's a real problem this game has, and I don't know how they're ever going to solve that. But I think that when you have the reality that it's a game which just has poor visuals, you need to design the fights around that. And you need to be very careful about the sort of mechanics you include. So having stuff like the Shaper Orbs, and you see the orbs here, which, you know, slowly fill up the ground, that's kind of fine, because it's one of those things where it very clearly telegraphed what the mistake is, and over time, you'll just learn through exposure of like, okay, this is what went wrong, I'll do better on the next attempt. And the other thing which is good about that is you can make a mistake and see more of the fight. I think something which is really important to having a good boss fight is sometimes you'll be doing a fight, you know that you haven't got enough damage to kill it, or you know you've made a mistake, like you know that the fight is doomed, but you keep playing through it so you get to practice more on the boss fight. But a lot of Path of Exile fights don't work like that. What a lot of Path of Exile boss fights do is you made the one mistake, now you are dead. And then when you've only got maybe one attempt a day, if that, depending on how much you play the game, then it robs the players of learning experience. I think that's one of the best things about, you know, progressing. I'm going to talk about World of Warcraft again. Progressing in World of Warcraft is when you're like, okay, we're probably not going to get the kill, we've lost some healers, but we're going to keep going on this attempt just to see more of the fight and just learning. I think it's really good when you can muscle memory a fight, where it's just you've just drilled the fight so much that, you know it and it's very difficult to make mistakes. I then think it's good to have fights which have some level of variety in them, fights which can evolve or change with time, so that if you do, you're not drilling the exact same thing every single time, because at that point you may as well be playing like Guitar Hero because you've just memorized it all, you know what I mean? A really good example of that would actually be Azaro. Azaro's got a lot of variables and permutations because he's got the different weapons, there's the different daily fonts and stuff. I know Azaro's a complete joke now, but like back in the day when doing Uberlab was considered like an endgame encounter, that was a pretty big deal. Maven sort of reintroduces this a little bit into stuff like Shaper, Elder, and all of that, because now she's being added into the fight and she brings a whole bunch of new permutations. So that's really good. But then you have the fact that Maven then breaks a lot of these fights because these fights weren't designed around having additional clones randomly in bullet hell phases. So it's sort of a step forward, but then 2 steps back, which kind of needs changing. So, ignoring criticizing, what are the kind of things that I would really like to see and I think could be very interesting in a game like Path of Exile? This is something which I think would be very interesting in just more video games in general, but having mechanics which are optional, and it's a case of if you fail the mechanic, you don't instantly die, but you make the fight harder for yourself. I always find it quite interesting that a lot of video games are based around get the magical artifact, the whole world needs the magical artifact, but you don't have a case of boss fights where you can choose either I'm going to get this magical artifact and I'm more powerful and the fight is easier, but then it gives me less loot, or I'm going to let the enemy get the magical artifact and then the fight is harder, but I get more loot. And that's like a perfect encounter for like Path of Exile. PoE seems like a really obvious game to have those kind of mechanics in there where you can put something in which, it's the equivalent of like an old Joar hard mode for anyone who played that back in the day. But you want fights which make you think about, am I going to take the easy way out? Am I going to go for the hard route? The other good thing about that is it lets you have those epic moments, when someone on Reddit uploads the ultimate super buffed boss kill, and then you can be like, oh, I'm so proud. Not only did I kill the fight, but I then killed the super hard version of the fight. And I always feel like that feels a lot more organic than just selecting hard. Like, I'm a big fan of video games feeling tangible. I'm not a big fan of video games feeling like video games. It's something I talk about quite a lot, game feel. I don't like stuff just being obscured in menus. I like stuff feeling organic and tangible. So, for example, I would much rather a system where there's a magic crown and you let the big boss put the magic crown on, so now they're more difficult, then I press the hard button. You know what I mean? Those are the kind of things I really like to see in boss fights. Another thing which I think Path of Exile struggles with a little bit is attention span. A lot of fights hard code in, this is the downtime, and this is the bit where you get your flasks back. And that can be interesting, but it can often lead to a case of, this is the bit of the fight where my brain turns off. Cirrus is really bad for that. I think Cirrus is actually a pretty good fight when it's not bugged, when it's working as intended, minus the storm stuff. Because as soon as he leaps up in the air, it's boring. Because it's like, okay, I'm now not doing anything. Shaper has this with the intermissions. Itziri has this with the ad phase. Those fights are just like, you know, less of that. I don't think there's necessarily anything wrong with having a change of pace, because that way you can have very tense moments, and then you can have moments for the player to breathe a little bit and collect themselves. That can be very important when it comes to dialing tension. If you have fights which are just pure intensity all the time, that's fine if you're playing like a bullet hell game, but a lot of people don't want that. And Path of Exile, like, it wouldn't be good for Path of Exile, I don't think, for them to randomly decide, 7 years in, oh, all fights are now extreme bullet hell. Having moments of bullet hell is fine if you then leverage that. But then what I would rather see in the downtime stuff is still have challenge, still have it so that, you could fail the fight, but then it's a different kind of challenge. I think that's kind of what they tried to do with the memory phase. I feel like that's what the memory phase is trying to do. It's a case of, okay, you don't need to worry about dodging things, you just need to, learn the pattern. But as you can see here, that completely breaks, where you can just log out and bypass the entire mechanic. And the other issue you have with the memory phase is it's very easy to successfully pass the memory phase, but then still die anyway, which is how Dan lost his character in Hardcore, which isn't fun. So, for example, the way I would like to see them do the memory phase is, okay, you failed the memory phase, now Maven's going to enrage, and she's going to attack faster, or more mechanics will be added to the fight. That way, it's not a case of you failed the memory phase, your character died, but it's you failed the memory phase, the fight is now harder. And that's a really good learning experience. And that way, you're still wanting to focus on the fight, and you can't just log out. Because if you just logged out, you'll fail the memory phase, and then the fight will get harder. And it means that you can still have the moments of victory. You can, bring it back from the jaws of defeat, and that's the most epic moments. Whenever I think of my most memorable boss kills in any video game, it's when I defeated the boss after making a mistake, and I did it with 1 health. It's oh, I've gone through all of my healing resources, I'm the last person alive in a raid, but we got the kill anyway. That's the epic feeling, and we don't really get that much in Path of Exile, because a lot of Path of Exile boss fights, instead of it being a case of, and you just barely killed it on 1% health, it's and you're dead. The PoE equivalent would be only having 1 portal left, which, I don't know how I feel about that, but anyway. That is my sort of rambly take on bossing in Path of Exile. So briefly to recap, I understand the importance of leveraging attention. I would like to see more soft enrages rather than extreme one-shots. I would like to see more fights that leveraged boss strength and player strength, making it feel like more of a struggle, making it feel like more of a direct battle of there is a resource we could both use, both being the player and the boss, and who has control over this resource. That allows players to do interesting things. that allows boss designers to do interesting things. You can then have it so that, you know, maybe that resource changes. There's different variables in the fight. Today it's a crown, tomorrow it's a magic sword. The day after that it's a magic bow. I don't know. Variety is good. It helps if they have interesting loot. And it also helps if we have a engaging story. That's one thing which is very good about the Maven fight, is we have this very clear journey towards Maven, which that was a very satisfying arc. Even if the fight itself wasn't that interesting, I enjoyed the journey to get there, compared to Cirrus, which is like, hi, I'm Cirrus, and he just appears randomly out of nowhere. But anyway, I'm Tarke, have a good day. Let me know what you think about bossing in Path of Exile, and just video games generally, by the way. Bye-bye.